So I'm Rob, this is George. You can just about tell us apart. So we're going to talk you through the road to IP transition in Europe, brakes and accelerants. Just a brief introduction. Ian mentioned earlier the call for evidence from Ofcom. George and I were responsible for the report that preceded that Ofcom work, looking at distribution costs in the UK. And we were also a big part of the team. Well, I say we. George was a big part of the team for a recent DCMS report looking at the future of TV distribution in the UK. So we think about migration to IP, the future of DTT on a really, on a daily basis. We're part of the 3 Reasons team at MTM, who are responsible for our UK forecast on the future of TV and future of TV landscape. So we have lots to say. What I thought we'd do is, there's 200 pages of the DCMS report. We've got ages, right? And there'll be a quiz at the end. So we're just going to run through all of that now. So yeah, we'll take comments at the end. I'm only kidding. A bit of audience participation. Last session of the day. Is everybody still awake? George, over to you.
Yeah, first one. So, how connected is the Connected TV Summit? Who here has the means to watch VOD on their primary TV set? Show of hands. If you don't put your hand up, you're a Luddite or you're at the wrong conference. Some people without their hands up. It's pretty good.
I'm intrigued about why you're here. Good. So this is, not particularly representative room in terms of connected TV-ness in the UK. So we reckon about 86% of the UK connected, probably closer to 95%. I'd have hoped 100, but maybe some people a bit shy. And similar case in France as well and in other European territories. Next question, the flip side, who has the means to watch broadcast TV on their main set? So how many people are broadcast households as well? Okay, that's pretty good as well. I'd say actually, again, not very representative of the UK. We see quite a high number of homes in the UK with IPTV only. So these are homes that don't have a broadcast mechanism. And that percentage is increasing really steadily year on year. Similar in other European territories. And again, not a particularly representative room. You're all TV folks, right? So you've got IP, you're watching broadcast, everything's connected. Probably skewing slightly older, I hope you don't mind me saying. So that's kind of what we expected.
Yeah, New World versus Old World viewing. So New World, SVOD and YouTube, Old World, BVOD and linear TV. Who's watching 90% plus New World, SVOD and YouTube?
What about if we went 80% New World? That's probably me.
Live sport.
Yeah, 50-50, like 50-50. Anybody reckon they watch more Old World telly than New World telly? Yeah, okay. Real telly, traditional telly. Yeah, we'll try and watch our language. One of the piece of work we do regularly, we did for the DCMS. This is a UK-specific forecast. Looking at what we believe the evolution of viewing to be. We don't have YouTube on this chart yet, which is we put that in the kind of new telly camp. But this is the average person. So I'm sorry to say none of you are average, and that might be a good thing. But what we're seeing at a kind of national level is if you add YouTube in, you're probably looking at 50-50 New World to Old World. By 2035-ish, depending on how quickly YouTube grows. Now, that is, we've heard a little bit already from Ian, that hugely skews by age demographic. So, there's lots of old people watching lots of linear broadcast, and that kind of skews the average when you take it across the whole population. When you look at that at younger audiences, we've heard a lot of that just this afternoon about how that's going to migrate over time. So that's a bit of context setting. This is one way that we think about the kind of IP transition, and I'm very pleased to say, because it does keep me and George in a job, that it's quite complicated. So there's lots of this whole range of different parties involved in what does IP transition look like, and the relationships between all these different groups means that it's quite hard to predict. We have a go anyway, and actually, what makes what we do really interesting is you can look at the relationships between each of the groups in this kind of picture and think about what does that mean for the future of TV? What does that mean for the future of DTT? So just to take, we could go into this for hours. We don't have that long. So what we've done is taken just a few examples of what's in this grid, just to highlight some of the kind of key issues that we're seeing. This is absolutely true in the UK. it's true across Europe as well. So if we take the relationship between viewing and TV device manufacturers, there was a question for iPlayer about what does prominence look like on a smart TV? And that is massively affecting the way that people consume content, and it's hugely influential in the kind of DTT debate. And I'll make it real with an example, which is that if you turn on your smart TV, if you're a connected TV home, the real estate that's dedicated to broadcast is tiny. It's probably a tile on a grid, and pretty much everything else on that screen is probably internet-delivered content. So in terms of what does that mean from a behavior point of view, we as an industry, the smart TV manufacturers in particular, but also the content providers, are hugely nudging people towards that IP content, even if you just take the screen real estate as your only signal. We're seeing, in the UK particularly, but this is definitely true in Europe, the pay TV operators migrating customers onto IPTV because it makes a bit more sense from a distribution mechanism point of view. If that's the only thing that you look at, and we've done projects on this, that is a huge influence in terms of moving people towards, it's a big enabler of IPTV. George, you want to talk about broadband?
Yeah, obviously you need internet for IP delivery. But it's not just about ISPs and network operators, it's also about the government and regulators as well, using public policy to help drive increased broadband coverage, particularly to those more unconnected regions. Yeah. Looking across Europe, right, we know that the EU has their kind of Project Digital. 2030, everyone's going to have gigabit-capable broadband available to them. Over in Spain, rolling out full fibre to complete by next year. And obviously we heard about in the UK, we know that super fast broadband coverage is at 98%, and we have Project Gigabit. So in 2030, everyone's going to be capable of receiving gigabit-capable broadband.
Yeah, and I think really interesting, like with the stats that Ian was sharing earlier, like that's in the UK, that's already a huge proportion of the population can have access to broadband if they wanted to. And one of the things that we look at, and I'll talk about in a second, is actually do people adopt? And then finally, again, didn't know that this was going to happen, but the discussion with Corenza just now about iPlayer and what the broadcasters are doing also has a really big influence. Talking about an iPlayer first strategy, that's exactly what's happening. The broadcasters increasingly investing in their online services rather than being a kind of channels business. Heard that about 6 minutes ago. And equally with propositions like Freely, that's a real effort, a real focus on how the broadcasters are connecting audiences. And Freely we see as a really important, this is true for HBBTV in general, but a really important kind of transition technology, especially connecting, those older viewers that Ian was referencing earlier as well. The other comment here I would make about the relationship between kind of broadcasters, content providers and viewers is that if you look at the kind of content pipeline, so think about how much money is being invested in content, all of the major studios are now producing primarily for VOD, either for their own services rather than linear. So if you just follow the money in terms of content production and content investment, it's all shifting in that direction. So if I want to watch the best shows, it's more and more likely that I'm going to find that show on an online service rather than that being a broadcast channel. So again, all of these things enabling IPTV. It's not all plain sailing. We're not ready to switch off DTT right now. We do a lot of thinking about this. I should say the forecast I presented earlier assumes we still have DTT in 2040. That's the basis of our work so far. I wouldn't predict that we'd switch off DTT entirely right now even. There's a potential, in the UK and Europe, there is a role for broadcast networks as a fallback. I think that people will still want to watch something, everybody at the same time, like we're hearing about sports events. So I don't think it's a given that we'll see the demise of DTT completely, especially not all the way across Europe. So I think, and that's one of the reasons why we do a lot of work in this area and thinking about the future of DTT. Just a few kind of things. The title of this was brakes and accelerants. These are the brakes, right? What's stopping an all IP transition? We've obviously got unconnected audiences. I won't talk at length about that, but all of the stuff that Ian was mentioning earlier about how likely are people to take broadband, what's stopping people taking broadband. You know, there's a big focus in the UK at the moment on digital inclusion and how to connect the unconnected. But what's really interesting, and we concluded this in the DCMS work as a project group, are issues not just once you connect people, there are still problems.
Yeah, I mean, it's not just about having broadband. You know, you're trying to watch iPlayer on your main TV set in your living room, but someone's binging Netflix, someone's downloading something off the internet, the kids are watching TikTok. And obviously, you know, having an old router, that can run into problems. Network traffic within the home is obviously a consideration. I mean, you could also be streaming the FA Cup final from your secondary set in your bedroom, but the walls are thick, the router is too far away, so it cuts out, it lags, and you hear about the goal via your neighbour screaming. But you know, this is a problem which we don't fully understand the kind of scale of it yet, because that actual data on how many secondary sets are actually connected versus unconnected, that data doesn't really exist. We don't actually know that in full today, but we need to.
Yeah, it's one of the benefits of DTT in the UK is that it just works. Like, you know, we heard it earlier on what do Gen Z want. I mean, what everybody wants is access to video that just works as soon as you turn it on. And that's a real benefit of DTT currently, is that it doesn't buffer. You turn on your telly and video's playing immediately. And increasingly we're seeing, you know, the streamers emulate that kind of experience with autoplay on Netflix. You know, and thumbnails playing automatically as you're browsing. That's a need that broadcast TV has served for years that is being emulated, and there are challenges around in-home connectivity that means that it's not necessarily a done deal. And I'm thinking about my parents, my grandparents, the idea that they can't watch the same telly as they've always done. I'm going to get phone calls asking me to sort their Wi-Fi out. Like I know that I am, and you know, I'm sure others in the room have that experience as well. The final thing, you know, I think in the DCMS report, there's a conclusion that network capacity in the UK can support IP at scale, but there's certainly concerns, you know, certainly from our ISP clients, that isn't necessarily, you know, a given. And there's a real question about resilience. Again, you know, DTT very rarely falls over. It very rarely stops working. It helps that there's only one, you know, there's a limited set of suppliers in that value chain. Whereas in an IP world, it's much, much more complicated. You know, handovers between CDNs and ISPs all over the place. Not least, you know, and then you add the broadcasters in as well. Who to blame when everything goes wrong, if it does. So I think there's a real kind of challenge around service levels as well, that, you know, all of which to overcome. We're running dangerously close to time, so we'll finish here. These are just some of the conclusions that we would draw. Again, I think what's encouraging is a lot of this has been repeated in the sessions that I've seen today. I think the forces, you'll be pleased to hear, Connected TV World Summit, driving us towards IP are strong. They're multifaceted, and you know, it's a kind of one-way ticket towards a kind of IP future. But that pace will really depend on the resilience of DTT audiences. And there's a lot of kind of public policy work going on at the moment, certainly in the UK, about how big that DTT-only audience is and how quickly people transition to kind of connected TV. Those challenges to connect the unconnected are significant, and you know, there's cultural and socioeconomic reasons for not having broadband, and those need to be addressed in order to get everybody online and allow them to watch BBC in the way that they've always done. And then, as George was saying, even if you have connected homes who are paying for broadband with sufficient speeds, you've still got a whole range of in-home challenges to address. And you know, I think that's a really interesting market. You know, and a potentially a big opportunity commercially to kind of fix those problems and make sure that everybody can watch as much TV as they possibly want. We've been George and Rob. Thanks for having us. That's it. Game over. Thank you.